My name is George Reese. I'm CTO of enStratus, which is one of the Dell partners, ecosystem partners. Our place in the cloud computing stack is at the enterprise cloud management layer. So we're the layer above OpenStack and Ops, sort of bringing what Chef is doing and what OpenStack is doing together to manage your self-service, your security, your the automation of your virtual machines in the cloud. One way I put it to people who are familiar with Crowbar is enStratus is kind of like Crowbar for the virtual machines. Crowbar handles your cloud infrastructure. enStratus more general purpose. What I'm going to go into today is actually go through the enStratus application and show what the role of cloud management is in a cloud computing infrastructure, and also show how, in particular, enStratus deals with some issues that you tend to run into in private clouds, public clouds, but especially in a hybrid cloud environment. So I'll jump right in here into our application, and what I'm going to show actually is a couple of different OpenStack environments. I'm going to show enStratus running against an SX cloud and against the Diablo cloud, and also just in the general context of operating across even non-OpenStack environments. So to start with, I'm logged in here, and in this case, I'm actually logged into the Rackspace SX environment. This is some basic status information on the main console. You can dive down and get a whole bunch of stats about your applications and your virtual machines that are running in your cloud computing infrastructure. Basically, there are three things that cloud management does for you. The first and most basic is that it acts as your single pane of glass across multiple clouds. In other words, it does all the things that you'd expect Horizon to handle for you in OpenStack, but it does them for multiple OpenStack clouds, for OpenStack and other private clouds, or OpenStack and a whole set of public clouds. And you can see in this particular environment, I have access to a bunch of different clouds, all through this single user interface with a single login. You might have noticed when I was logging in, it's protected by multi-factor authentication. Actually, when you're deploying enStratus, you have a choice of any number of authentication mechanisms. You saw the username password with a multi-factor token. In this case, it was delivered via SMS. The username and password part can be handled either by enStratus directly. It can be handled by an Active Directory and LDAP server, or you can delegate authentication to a SAML 2.0 server, to an OpenID server, and we also have our own proprietary SSO choice if you're allergic to SAML or OpenID for some reason. But once you log in, you have access to all the different clouds, and you can begin this on-demand self-service provisioning. And the good news for an OpenStack environment is enStratus supports all aspects of a whole variety of OpenStack clouds. So, and we know the differences between Cactus, Diablo, SX. We know some clouds have security groups, some don't, and we expose all that to the user interface. Horizon obviously doesn't support all the features of OpenStack at any given point in time. but you know, the reason to use enStratus isn't to replace Horizon. It's to support your operations again across multiple clouds, or if you just got your single OpenStack cloud, to add features that don't belong essentially in Horizon. Now, so those features come in the form of two areas. One is complex user management, access controls, and other governance type controls, which I'll get into over here. And the other part is automation and configuration management. So, you know, auto scaling, auto recovery, managing your holistic applications that are deployed in the cloud. So, you know, for example, you know, to take a simple example, let's say you're deploying a marketing app that's based on Drupal talking to a MySQL database. enStratus manages the whole application, both Drupal and its dependency on MySQL, and you know, make sure backups are getting done, make sure that the security group rules are in place, and all of that stuff, and you know, of course, the fun auto scaling things. So I'll start off with some of the governance features real quick, and go into user and access control to start with. So here we are in the Users tab, and in this particular tab, cloud, I'm the only person who has access to it. I can go and add more users. Now, if I'm integrated with Active Directory or some other external directory service, I don't actually add users inside enStratus. I would add them in Active Directory, and they would just show up in enStratus, belonging to whatever groups that they belong to in Active Directory. You know, I can do a couple of key things here. I'll skip some of the more esoteric stuff and just focus on a couple of things. One is users can belong to groups, and that's sort of that group membership persists across all the clouds. So if I have 5 different clouds, I'm always in the admin group for all those clouds. But the admin is probably a bad word. Let's say I'm also in the agenting group. I would be in the agenting group for all those clouds. But the agenting group may have different roles in different clouds. So it may have a role that gives it full access in say, a cloud for R&D, but only limited access in a production cloud. I also have budget codes, and these are budgets against which I can bill the resources that I'm launching in the cloud. So in this case, you can see I have access to the default budget and the R&D budget. And that means, and I'll show it in just a second, but that when I am provisioning resources, whether directly via the self-service capabilities or whether through some sort of automation, anything that I cause to be provisioned can only be provisioned against one of those 2 budgets. And then there are, of course, rules governing beyond that. You know, obviously I can't budget against the test budget because I don't have access to it, but also if the default budget or the R&D budget are over budget, then I can't provision against those either. And if both of them are over budget, that means I can't provision new resources. I'm out of luck. The question that always comes up is, do we start killing resources to bring things back in line? And the answer is no, we don't. I think that would be a bad thing. But you can write your own logic against our API if you want. We do have a RESTful API that exposes everything in this user interface and more. So I'll jump into the roles to show off some access control, start with the CSR, and show you how the access rights are managed. Now, as I mentioned earlier, users and groups are static across all of the accounts and all the clouds to which you have access. But the roles are done on an account-by-account basis, so that, as I mentioned earlier, one group can have one set of access rights in in one cloud and then a separate set in another cloud. And how we do it is we pick different types of resources that have actions that are specific to the kind of resource that it is. So like a relational database, for example, I can configure it, have general read access, create new ones, so on and so forth. And then qualifiers, which determine, can I do those things to any relational database, or only relational databases that belong to a group in which I'm in, or that are a part of a billing code to which I have access, or my own. So, for example, up above you see for the image resource, I can define servers from images that belong to for people who belong to the same group that the image is in. A typical use case for that is if you as central IT want to vet images and then make them available to people, or make them available to select groups, you can assign them a group, harden them and then make them available, and then people in that group can only launch from those hardened machine images. And then, once I launch a server, this rule here, this is actually a fairly useless rule. Probably a better rule would be something like server terminate mine. That means that I could only shut down servers that I personally launch that belong to me. The important point about all this is that these roles are fully customizable to the job functions in your IT department or in your operation, which is, one of the most basic information security controls in any control framework, is that people only have the access to administrate things that is required by their job function. And this functionality makes sure that you can achieve that particular control. And one of the things I think you'll see throughout here is that enStratus makes sure that checklists that you have about policies governing your internal systems, enStratus makes sure that your cloud environment can live up to those policies. And typically, without enStratus, a private cloud, a public cloud infrastructure cannot be made to meet those information security controls. The next part, so that's access controls. So we got authentication. I want to touch a little bit more on the budgeting mechanisms that we're talking about. As I had alluded to the idea of quotas. We actually have two different types of quotas. We have the concept of hard quotas and soft quotas. And I'll take the default budget because I have access to that. Here you see we have a budget that's defined, that's called default. Every account comes with this default budget. It's got a soft quota of $100.06, a hard quota of $500.29, and an actual usage. And well, today's the end of the month, so actual and current are current and projected are going to be pretty close to identical. And this normally is earlier in the month. There's a little bit of variation, but there's a lot of variation between current and projected. But I can go in and define these soft quotas, hard quotas. I don't have to specify quotas. If I don't specify any quotas, it just tracks. If I set up a soft quota, the soft quota will be a trigger point at which a notification gets sent out to the appropriate people. And enStratus has this notification system that I won't go into today that you can push out these alerts by email, SMS, to an API endpoint. As a matter of fact, all notifications in enStratus go out through the same notification mechanism. And I'm missing one other delivery mechanism that I can't think of off the top of my head. But so a soft quota will trigger one of those alerts, and the alert will go out. The hard quota means is that I can't provision any more resources against that. So, if I cross the soft quota but haven't crossed the hard quota yet, the alert goes out, but I can still do stuff to put the budget at risk. and then obviously once the hard close cost, that's it. A couple of important things about these budgets is, number one, they can, how it's calculated, the usage can either be from, if it's a public cloud, from the actual pricing of the public cloud, or you can customize it to have your own internal chargebacks. And then obviously for a private cloud, it's defined by your own internal chargeback mechanisms. Second thing is that it's multi-currency, which is really important in a hybrid cloud environment where one cloud provider may be billing in euros, another dollars, and yet another in yen. enStratus will take those different things up, convert them into whatever your accounting currency is. So let's say your accounting currency is New Zealand dollars. They'll take all those three different ones, roll them up into New Zealand dollars, and match against your quotas in your local accounting currency. And as I mentioned earlier, it's all across all of your accounts. It's not on one account. So I set up a budget for a system that's doing bursting from private cloud into public cloud. It's going to count those resources in the two clouds against one budget, assuming that's the way I want it. If I want it in two separate budgets, I can do it that way too. So when it comes time to, let's say, launch a new virtual machine, pick a nice Ubuntu image here. You can see I only have access to that R&D budget. Even though my user editing screen showed me having access to R&D in default, default was over the hard quota, so I can't provision against it. If the R&D budget was also over the hard quota, I'd have an error message here saying I'm all out of budget, I can't do anything. Other elements of launching a VM that are different than, say, just plain self-service through Horizon would be things like, obviously, assigning it a group. Then I can also define automatic termination or pause points. So, particularly if I'm doing a sales demo or something like that, I would say terminate automatically after 2 hours. Or if I'm doing something for development, I may have it pause automatically after 24 hours. Make sure that I'm not using resources poorly. Also, integration with configuration management, which is a good segue into the next part on automation. But essentially, enStratus integrates with 3 different configuration management options to date, and we'll be adding more. We do Chef, we do Puppet, and we do sort of proprietary poor man's configuration management, which we call object store, which is really a fancy word for scripts that are stored in Swift or S3 or something. We include that not because we encourage that behavior, but there are some people who just aren't ready to take on configuration management as a discipline unto itself. And so I can define, which configuration management system, I want, define personality, pick personalities that I want to apply to this VM, and I don't think I have a meaningful personality in here. And in addition to the personality, so typically a personality might be something like a MySQL server. It'd be, your chef recipe, essentially, your cookbook. And you can apply it here, and then scripts would be individual scripts or recipes that you additionally want to apply above and beyond the personality. And then when the VM's launched, the VM is automatically set up as a MySQL server. You define all that in the configuration management section, where you define your different, your Puppet server, your Chef server, or whatever, and then it becomes available when you try to launch the VM. Last part I want to touch on here is the complete automation system. This is where you handle, you set up these applications, and enStratus manages the full application life cycle. There are 3 parts to this. There's the service catalog, which I'm bringing up right now. There's the designer piece, which is more of a developer-focused thing. And then there's the deployment section, which shows you what you've actually got running out there. The service catalog is really, this is the beginning of what we say is the end-all, be-all of cloud management, essentially making sure that, hold on one second here. Yeah, okay, thanks. Wherein anybody in the company can come in and look at a service catalog of, and I'll just use LampStack as an example here. Hopefully it's got meaningful data in it. But you can pick, I want a LampStack, and go define your application requirements in terms of redundancy, availability, cost, and so on. And of course, it wouldn't be a demo if something wasn't working properly. This is our dev environment, so hopefully it's going to come up. Let me try a different one. Well, since I seem to be hanging here, I'll just describe it in general. The service catalog, you go in and you say, here's my budget. You pick the thing you want, so the LampStack, you say, here's my budget. You say, I want, 99.99 availability. And ideally, the developer has configured it so that it's capable of running across many different regions and many different clouds. And then enStratus will pick which is the appropriate cloud to go into and then deploy it there for the end user. So they don't know anything about machine images, VMs, scaling characteristics. enStratus takes care of all that for them. If you want greater control, you can, of course, go into the designer and just do a one-off type deployment. And the designer is, of course, the developer-oriented thing where they say, here's my, so here I have a simple website. It's got application service here, database tier. We typically use that because it's well understood architecture, but the reality is that enStratus supports arbitrarily complex architectures. So you can have like our Cloud Foundry service catalog items are pretty complex. It's like 5 different tiers in a Cloud Foundry deployment, I think. But here we just have 2, and in this designer I say that the application tier has, let's say, a Drupal service on it. The database tier has a MySQL service on it. And then I define the dependencies between Drupal and MySQL in the Managed Services screen. And then when I've got it all done, I can do one of 2 things. And I can add configurations for many different regions. But when I'm ready, I can actually publish a deployment to the service catalog, which means it's shared with everybody else now, and they can create their own actual instances from it based on their requirements. Or I can just say, deploy this as it's defined here, which is start deployment, and then it will just launch whatever you've defined straight from here, and then it will become available under the deployment screen. Once it's up and running, enStratus will, like as I said, based on demand and based on the auto-scaling you defined, scale it up, scale it down. It will, if there's a failure in the cloud, it will kill off the bad VM and replace it with a good one. If you want enStratus to do your backups, enStratus will perform backups. It will snapshot block storage devices. It will do service-level backups of the various services you have installed and stick them in object storage. It will also copy that to a secondary object storage for DR purposes. It will also do the same thing for data sources, do things like MySQL dumps and so on for your data sources. So that's sort of the high-level view of enStratus. Certainly feel free to reach out at me, george.reese@enStratus.com, or I'm on Twitter. George Reese is my Twitter handle. and happy to talk more. I guess the one last thing I'd like to add is that you know, enStratus has both SaaS options. You can go cloud to www.enStratus.com and sign up and use our SaaS product, or you know, as we work in the OpenStack Dell environment, we're typically on premise, and you install enStratus as part of your as a bar clamp with Crowbar, as you would the rest of your Dell OpenStack environment. Okay, thank you.
Are there any questions?
What are the default access rights for each group? Are they restricted?
There's a question here in the room. What are the default access rights for the group?
So there's a question in one of the rooms. What are the default access rights for a group? The default access rights for well, any group has no access by default. You have to assign a group to a role in a given account for it to start to have access. And an empty role with no access rights also has no access. So the bare minimum thing that you need to do with a role to actually make it meaningful is to assign it what's called the access right, which is probably an overly fancy way of saying read access.
Okay, there's another question. Yeah.
So as far as when you're spinning up VMs, what is the interface between enStratus and what we saw this morning? Is there like a northbound API that's being passed?
So, yeah, so when we're, the question is what's the interface between enStratus and I guess OpenStack for the provisioning of the VM? Yeah. Well, so right now, today the way things work is enStratus first makes a request of OpenStack via the OpenStack API via credentials that you enter on your account settings screen. Typically, those credentials would be some sort of administrator level credentials in OpenStack, and those are never exposed to anybody in the system through the enStratus API. Those are completely hidden. And then, so enStratus makes a launch request through the OpenStack API, and then there's a separate component in enStratus that then is pulling OpenStack to validate the success of the operation. So the launch actually returns back to the client, to the user interface immediately, or to the API if you're doing it through our API immediately, and then a separate process is asynchronously checking for it. And enStratus will then log the request. It also logs any changes that it detects. In the future, we're hoping that OpenStack will add a push notification system so that OpenStack can push these changes to us and we don't have to do the polling. But the reality today is we do the polling.
Okay, thank you.
There's a question on the chat session. Do you see hybrid clouds gaining popularity or just private or public?
So there's a question, I'm sorry if I'm repeating this for everybody on the line here. I'm repeating it for the people locally in the room who can't hear the line. Do we see hybrid clouds gaining popularity or public or private? We see everybody who's doing a private cloud has a public component. It may not be the first question they ask, but inevitably they want to tie it into some kind of public cloud. You know, cloud bursting, though we support it, I think is something that we only ever end up doing in proof of concepts because it's cool to show off. I don't think people have actual practical uses for it yet. So hybrid cloud in that sense isn't the big thing. It's more, I've got a public cloud and I've got a private cloud, and I put some things in the private cloud and put some things in the public cloud. And that is, in my view, the enterprise use case for the next year or so, and then we'll start to see applications that actually span public and private.
Question, George. So regarding the cloud bursting scenario you mentioned, is that because it's not ready for practical use, or are there no use cases that you see today?
So the question is whether my commentary on cloud bursting is whether it's because cloud bursting isn't ready or about the state of practical uses of it. My perception on cloud bursting is that there's so much when people are deciding to take on cloud, it's not like adopting Ruby as a programming language where you've got one thing you're learning. Adopting cloud is learning about private clouds, learning about public clouds, learning about DevOps, configuration management. A lot of times it's also involves learning about big data and NoSQL and all that stuff. And then you add on the hot headache of how do I architect applications to be burstable, and it's just, that's enough to make anybody's head burst. So I think the issue with cloud bursting isn't that there aren't valid use cases. I think there are valid use cases for it. It's not that the technology isn't ready. I mean, we've done very cool proofs of concept showing cloud bursting from cloud A to cloud B. It's just that practically speaking, people aren't ready to swallow that pill while they're swallowing all these other pills.
So a quick question around metering and billing for OpenStack or for clouds that are less than easy to extract actual billing and cost information from. How do you deal with that?
Can someone repeat that? I was getting feedback on that question.
Well, broken. Is this still echoing? One?
No, it's not, that's not echoing.
I was asking, how do you extract billing information or cost information from OpenStack or from other clouds that are less forthcoming in providing that information?
So the question is, how do we extract cost information from OpenStack or public clouds that are less than forthcoming on that? And the answer is that we don't. You define your costing in us. Now we maintain a database for popular public clouds, for the public clouds we support, but typically in a private cloud scenario, you know, you're dealing with a chargeback model, and so you make it up and you enter that into the enStratus database. So we maintain two databases. One is for the standard pricing, and one is for your custom charge. For example, with Amazon, if you just want to go with their standard pricing, you can use our database as is, but you can also define exceptions even on an account-by-account basis. Say this account gets charged a premium on top of the Amazon costs, and enStratus will recognize that for the budget. In OpenStack, you just have the one database that's your charge. I mean, you could do on top of that custom chargebacks, but typically, you know, you just end up with one database for that. But you have to define that and maintain it in enStratus. Because nobody right now provides that information in a nice way. It's not like we even have one cloud that's doing it for us. Some of the clouds are working on it, which is nice, but I'm not counting on it.
Make sense?
Any other questions? Okay.